History, they say, is written by the victors. But what if there were no victors? Only confusion, boredom, and tea gone cold. This story is about wars that mattered to no one, not even those who fought them. The world has always been restless, eager to draw swords for reasons too small to remember. Yet in those forgotten moments, there lies a strange beauty. People fighting passionately for absolutely nothing. The year was 1838. The island of Eigg sat quietly off the coast of Scotland, wrapped in mist and sheepish silence. But one morning, a British customs officer accused a local farmer of stealing a button from his coat. The farmer denied it. Of course, the argument escalated, as pride often does, until two local militias formed, the Butterman and the Redcoats. Thus began what villagers would later call the Button War. No one really wanted to fight. The Buttonmen had pitchforks. The Redcoats had an aging cannon that hadn't fired since Napoleon. Still, each side stood on opposite hills, waiting for orders that never came. For 3 days, they shouted across the valley, mostly insults about laundry and stolen chickens. When rain poured down on the 4th day, everyone simply went home. No one was killed, and the missing button was later found under a dog's paw. It should have ended there. But word spread faster than sense. Newspapers from London to Edinburgh mocked the war over a button, and soon other small towns began having their own versions, duels over teacups, arguments about fences, even a brief war of the missing hat. The 1800s were an age of pride wrapped in boredom, for men who longed to be heroes but lacked real causes. These absurd quarrels became a strange kind of theater. The soldiers, if you could call them that, returned to their lives. They were fishermen, bakers, and shepherds again. Yet at night they'd tell their children they'd once stood in a great war. Memories softened the shame into legend. Perhaps that's how most wars survive, not through glory, but through the gentle lies we tell ourselves to make the past seem noble. The Button War became a bedtime story long before anyone forgot why it began. Decades later, a historian named Clara Finch stumbled upon the tale while cataloging forgotten conflicts. She laughed at first, then frowned. How many lives, she wondered, had been spent chasing pride instead of peace? She decided to document every pointless war she could find, not to mock, but to remember. For in every foolish war, there was something heartbreakingly human. Our endless need to feel important, even when nothing is at stake. Clara traveled across Europe, collecting stories of minor rebellions and forgotten feuds. In dusty archives, she found yellowed letters describing battles that lasted mere minutes, often ending in laughter or confusion. One particularly strange account told of a cheese war in the Netherlands, fought over a wheel of Gouda that rolled into the wrong village. Clara began to see a pattern. Wherever pride met boredom, war seemed inevitable. She felt oddly moved by these tales. They were not about conquest, but about the fragile egos of small towns and lonely men. It wasn't hate that started these wars. It was loneliness, perhaps even love, twisted into pride. People wanted to matter. to have stories that reached beyond their farms or fishing boats. Fighting, even pointlessly, made them feel part of something larger than the quiet emptiness of their days. By candlelight, Clara began writing her book, The Most Pointless Wars in History. She filled each page with names no one had spoken in centuries. As she wrote, she felt a deep tenderness for these forgotten souls, for the farmer who lost a button, for the soldier who fired at nothing, for the children who listened by firelight. History, she realized, wasn't just about power. It was also about small people making noise in the vast silence of time. And so began her journey into the absurd. With her notebook and her weary heart, Clara set out to uncover the next story, one even stranger than the Bataan War. She heard whispers of an island feud where no shots were fired, yet two nations declared victory. It was called the War of the Stray Pig. Clara packed her things, kissed her typewriter goodbye, and headed west, not knowing this ridiculous tale would change her forever. The sea was calm when Clara arrived at San Juan Island, a misty patch between America and Britain. In the mid-1800s, it was little more than grass, fog, and pride. Farmers from both sides claimed the same lands, each certain the other was trespassing. The world had seen empires rise and fall, yet here, two great nations were about to argue over the ownership of a single wandering pig. The story began in June 1859. An American farmer named Lyman Cutler found a pig rooting through his potato patch. The pig belonged to a British settler from the nearby Hudson's Bay Company. Lyman, hungry and annoyed, shot the pig. When the British demanded compensation, he refused. The argument grew like an echo across the sea. From one angry man to two governments too proud to back down. Soon, soldiers landed. The Americans sent 70 men with muskets and one rusty cannon. The British responded with 3 warships bristling with guns, yet neither side fired a shot. Officers exchanged polite threats over tea, while the soldiers built camps and complained about the rain. For months, the standoff continued, a war where no one wanted to fight, and everyone pretended they might. The islanders found the situation ridiculous. Children played soldier between the camps, shouting bang at each other across the fields. Traders made a fortune selling whiskey to both sides. Some soldiers even played cards together at night, laughing beneath the same stars. War had never been so civil, yet beneath the humor there was tension, a quiet fear that one nervous trigger could turn absurdity into tragedy. Clara read every letter she could find from that summer. Most were filled with boredom, men writing about the fog, the loneliness, the endless potatoes. She imagined their faces, young, tired, homesick. They had come prepared to die for a pig neither had seen. Somehow, that thought made her ache. It was too human, too familiar. How often, she wondered, do people destroy peace just to feel righteous? One diary moved her deeply. A British Marine wrote, "We stand guard at the edge of the world, not against the enemy, but against our own foolishness." His words felt timeless. Clara copied them carefully, as if preserving a heartbeat. The war, she discovered, ended when cooler heads intervened. Both nations agreed to joint occupation of the island until someone could decide who actually owned it someday. Someday came 12 years later, when Germany's Kaiser Wilhelm I, of all people, was asked to arbitrate. He ruled in favor of the United States, and Britain quietly withdrew. Not a single man had died. The pig, ironically, remained the only casualty. Yet for decades afterward, both nations spoke proudly of the pig war, as if it had been a triumph of restraint, not a comedy of pride. As Clara finished her notes, she felt something shift inside her. These stories weren't they just absurd, they were mirrors. Each senseless conflict revealed how fragile peace truly was. One man's pride, one careless moment, could summon entire armies. She began to see that the line between wisdom and foolishness was as thin as the island's mist. Perhaps that was why such wars were forgotten. They were too embarrassing to remember. That night, Clara sat by her window, watching the waves beat softly against the rocks. She thought of the soldiers who once stood there, waiting for a war that never came. The silence they left behind felt sacred. Maybe history's truest heroes were not those who fought, but those who chose not to. She closed her notebook slowly, whispering to the sea, "May all wars end like this, with laughter instead of blood." But her journey was far from over. In a Paris archive, a Khalid mentioned another absurd conflict, one fought with flags, not weapons. It was called the War of the Bucket, a medieval feud so senseless it made the pig war seem almost logical. Clara smiled faintly. Another forgotten story was waiting for her, buried under centuries of dust. And so, she packed her suitcase once more, chasing the next beautiful mistake. Clara arrived in Italy beneath a sky the color of warm dust. The year was long gone, but the memory of 1325 lingered in the cobblestones of Modena and Bologna, two proud city-states once divided by faith, politics, and, as it turned out, a wooden bucket. In that age, honor was measured by banners and saints, and sometimes by the most ridiculous trophies imaginable. It began when Madonese's soldiers raided Bologna and, for reasons no historian has ever truly explained, stole a bucket from the city's main well. It was plain, wooden, and half rotten, yet it became a symbol of humiliation. Bologna demanded its return. Modena refused. Within weeks, thousands of men gathered under opposing flags, ready to die for a piece of water-stained wood. The Battle of Zappolino followed, brief, chaotic, and utterly pointless. Nearly 2,000 lives were lost before the dust settled, and Modena claimed victory, proudly displaying the bucket like a holy relic. No peace treaty, no grand purpose, only silence and shame. Clara walked the old fields, feeling the ghosts of men who had marched proudly to die for something they could have simply rebuilt. She visited the museum where the bucket still hung, suspended in glass like a sacred artifact. People took photos, children laughed, yet Clara felt a pang in her chest. The wood was cracked, darkened by time, but still whole. So many lives, she thought. For this, she placed her hand against the glass and whispered, "You must have been worth everything once." The guard glanced at her strangely, but said nothing. In the evenings, Clara wrote by candlelight, her pen slow and deliberate. The story of the bucket war wasn't just about foolishness, it was about obsession. Pride, she realized, was humanity's oldest addiction. The more trivial the cause, the harder we cling to it, because to admit it never mattered would mean facing the emptiness within ourselves. And emptiness, Clara thought, terrifies us more than death. A letter arrived from her editor in London. He wrote that her manuscript was delightfully melancholic, but questioned if anyone would care about such stories. Clara smiled sadly. That was precisely the point. No one remembered these wars because they embarrassed us. They revealed too much of what we are, fragile creatures pretending to be grand. She tucked the letter away, determined to keep writing anyway. One night, she dreamed of the soldiers of Bologna, marching beneath tattered flags, not for glory but for belonging. She saw their faces tired, hopeful, unaware that history would forget them. When she woke, her pillow was damp with tears. The bucket war, absurd as it was, had become something more. A quiet monument to the longing inside every human heart to be seen, even in foolishness. Clara visited the church where the soldiers were once blessed before battle. The priest, an old man with trembling hands, told her, "The bucket still divides us, in stories at least. But perhaps division is how people remember." His words lingered. Memory, she realized, often survives through conflict, not peace. Without friction, even love fades. Maybe that's why people keep finding reasons to fight. Before leaving Italy, Clara took one last walk through Modena's narrow streets. Bells rang softly above her, echoing through centuries of pride. She thought of the bucket, that small, ordinary object turned into legend. Maybe all wars, she mused, start with something that's simple. A thing someone refuses to let go. Whether it's a button, a pig, or a bucket, the story always begins with stubbornness and ends with regret. At the train station, Clara bought a ticket to Belgium. There, she had heard rumors of another bizarre conflict, one where no armies fought. Yet the declaration of war lasted more than a century. It was called the 100-Year Belgian War, that wasn't. As the train pulled away, she closed her notebook and smiled faintly. Another forgotten chapter awaited her, whispering softly through time's quiet pages. Belgium greeted Clara with gray skies and quiet streets. The scent of rain clung to every stone. She came searching for a story whispered among historians, a war that lasted more than a century, though not a single shot was ever fired. They call it the Forgotten Siege of Brussels, but it was, in truth, a bureaucratic misunderstanding that outlived every soldier who might have cared. The tale began in 1830, when Belgium broke away from the Netherlands. Amid the confusion, a Dutch fort near the border never received word of peace. For decades, its small garrison continued to hoist the Dutch flag, send reports, and await orders that never came. The Belgians, equally confused, avoided confrontation, assuming diplomacy would sort it out. It never did. Not for 100 years. Life went on inside the fort as if time had stopped. The soldiers grew old, were replaced, and their children inherited their posts. Each generation was told the same story. We are at war, but peace will come soon. Outside the walls, Belgium modernized, kings changed, and trains rode across the countryside. Yet the fort remained a lonely echo of a war nobody remembered was still happening. Clara walked among the ruins, where ivy crawled over a crumbling stone. She imagined the last commander, gray-haired, loyal, saluting a flag no one else recognized. Perhaps he knew the truth, but kept the lie alive out of duty. There was something heartbreakingly noble in that men fighting not against an enemy, but against time itself, refusing to admit that their purpose had long dissolved. In an old archive, Clara found a letter dated 1905. "We hold the line," it read, "though the enemy does not come." The writer's tone was weary but proud. It reminded her of the British Marine from the Pig War. Both men trapped in the same quiet absurdity. Across centuries, she saw them all linked by the same fragile thread. Humans desperate for meaning in places where none existed. When the Second World War finally arrived, German troops stumbled upon the fort and laughed in disbelief. "Who are you?" they asked. "The Dutch army," came the reply. The Germans, bewildered, simply told them to go home. That moment, absurd and tender, marked the unofficial end of a war that had existed only on paper and in the hearts of men who had never seen battle. Clara closed the folder gently. Her chest ached with something she couldn't name. Sorrow, admiration, maybe both. The war had been pointless, yes, but within its absurdity lay devotion, loyalty, and hope. These men had built their lives around an illusion, yet somehow that illusion had given them purpose. Perhaps, she thought, that is what keeps the world turning, our willingness to believe in something, however small. That evening, she visited a cafe in Brussels, ordering coffee as rain tapped against the glass. Around her, life buzzed laughter, music, conversations about nothing and everything. How strange, she thought, that the same country once lived with a war no one noticed. Peace was so fragile, yet so ordinary that people forgot it even existed. Maybe that was the secret. Peace survives best when it goes unnoticed. In her journal, Clara wrote, "The wars we forget are often the kindest ones. They ask for no blood, only memory." She felt her story nearing its end, but one final chapter remained. Somewhere in Africa, she had heard, there was a war that began by accident and ended just as the War of the Golden Stool, they called it. She bought the one-way ticket south, her heart heavy yet strangely hopeful. As her train rolled through the night toward the coast, Clara looked out the window and thought of all the people she'd met only through time. The button, the pig, the bucket, the forgotten soldiers. Each absurd war felt like a mirror held up to humanity's quiet madness. She wondered if peace was ever truly wise, or just the pause between mistakes. The sea waited beyond, and with it, her final story. The heat in Ghana wrapped around Clara like silken smoke. She had come chasing one last absurdity, a war fought not for land or power, but for a stool, a golden one, sacred to the Ashanti people. In 1900, the British governor, eager to civilize, demanded to sit upon it. He didn't understand what the stool meant. It was more than gold. It was the soul of a nation, untouchable, eternal. When the Ashanti heard of the governor's demand, silence fell across the villages. Then came a quiet fury. Under the leadership of Ja Asantewa, a queen mother with fire in her eyes, the people rose. "If you men will not fight," she said, "then we women shall." The British laughed at first, But laughter turned to fear when the Ashanti surrounded their fort, armed with courage and pride stronger than bullets. The war raged for months, fierce but uneven. The Ashanti fought from the forests, striking and vanishing like ghosts. Yet the British had rifles and reinforcements. In the end, Jacintewa was captured, exiled to the Seychelles, where she died far from home. The stool, though, was never surrendered. Hidden away in secret, it remained untouched, a quiet victory wrapped in loss. Clara stood before the Ashanti elders, who told the story with soft, steady voices. They spoke not of battle, but of dignity. "The stool is not a chair," one man said. "It holds the spirit of our people. You do not sit on a soul." His words sank deep into Clara's heart. She realized this war, though pointless in politics, was sacred in spirit. Sometimes, she thought, what seems absurd is actually divine. She visited Jacintewa's statue, bronze against the morning light. Children played nearby, their laughter echoing through the square. Clara smiled through tears. History, she thought, was not a collection of battles, but a tapestry of pride, pain, and longing. Every war she had studied, no matter how foolish, carried the heartbeat. And this one, the war of the golden stool, felt like its final golden note. That evening, Clara wrote her last pages by lantern light. She wrote of buttons and pigs, of buckets and forts, of stools and souls. She saw now that absurdity was only the mask history wore to hide its tenderness. Behind every ridiculous war were people trying to protect something fragile: identity, love, belonging. Perhaps the world fought not out of hatred, but from fear of being forgotten. As the night deepened, the sound of drums drifted through the air, slow, steady, ancient. Clara closed her notebook and listened. It felt like a heartbeat echoing through centuries. She wondered if Jacintewa had once heard the same rhythm before battle. It wasn't war she was hearing, but memory itself, the sound of humanity refusing to vanish, even after everything else had turned to dust. The next morning, Clara packed her belongings. Her book was finished, but her heart was heavy. The world, she knew, would keep inventing reasons to fight. Pride would always find new disguises. Yet perhaps, by remembering these forgotten absurdities, she could soften the edges of tomorrow's anger. If people could laugh, maybe they could forgive. And in forgiveness, perhaps, peace might quietly bloom. On the ship home, Clara watched the sea shimmer beneath the sun. She thought of all the pointless wars she had traced, each one a mirror of human longing. "We fight," she whispered, "because we cannot stand silence." The ocean murmured in reply. Maybe that was the truth. Maybe war was simply noise, the sound we make when we're too afraid to face our own stillness. When the ship reached England, Clara stepped ashore and felt the wind brush her face. She smiled faintly, knowing her journey had ended. History would forget her name, perhaps, just as it forgot the soldiers, the farmers, the fools. But that was fine. In her pages lived their echoes, small, strange wars that proved humanity's greatest weakness and its quietest beauty, our endless need to matter, even for nothing at all.